welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley reporting from Washington, D.C. The eyes of the world fixed for the last 2 days on the St. Petersburg G20 summit. And in the course of this, a split has come to light in the international community, but it's clear Obama is leading a forlorn cause, even on the level of verbal support, purely verbal support, which is far from active participation in aggression on the military level. Obama's verbal support is limited to France, to Turkey, to Canada, Saudi Arabia, and the British. And, of course, among these, Canada is unlikely, almost excluded, that Harper would ever join in the military action. The British government of Cameron has been cut off at the knees by its own parliament. And if Cameron insists on joining in the military attack, we will have a grade A constitutional crisis in Great Britain. Maybe we'll have the fall of the monarchy. If he uses the royal prerogative to go to war, maybe it's time to forget about the royal prerogative and abandon the cause of living in the past. The Saudis, of course, speaking out of all sides of their mouths, promising money and military forces, but of course their military forces are these mercenary forces, and then Turkey, and of course Erdogan, having been betrayed by Obama and those nighttime promises about the immediate collapse of Syria back in 2011. I think Erdogan is looking for revenge. And on the side of peace, we've got much of the world, Russia, China. This is very important that President Xi of China, wielding his veto in the UN Security Council, made an appeal last night, Thursday evening, the 5th of September, at the special Syria dinner at the Peterhof. Xi made a special appeal to Obama to back off from military force. Obama adamant, no, he's going to push ahead. So Russia with Putin, and we'll go into the Russian position in some detail. China, anti-war. India, notice this is already much of the population and land surface of the world. Russia, China, India, they're joined by South Africa, and the president of South Africa, apparently an eloquent voice for peace. Indonesia, adamantly against war. Argentina and Brazil against war and fed up with the excesses of the United States, right, which they might have known about, but now they're embarrassed by having it come out in public. And in addition to this, the general lineup is the BRICS as a whole, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, are against this lunatic military adventure, this leap into the dark or leap into the abyss, as we might describe it. His Holiness Francis the First, the Roman Pope, has pointed out that the quest for a military solution is futile. This is a much stronger statement than the previous appeals for peace that the Pope has made. I think the Vatican has become aware of the criminal energy behind the U.S. Aggressive push. Even such figures as Van Rompuy and Barroso, the two top Eurocrats and Eurogarchs of the European Commission, they're also telling Obama to back off. And, of course, in the background, we've got Anders Fogh Rasmussen, the NATO Secretary General. No, NATO will not participate. So you don't have any of them. You don't have the European Union. You don't have NATO. You've got a couple of renegade European powers. And you've got Ban Ki-moon. Ban Ki-moon, joined by Brahimi, his Syria negotiator, after meeting with Foreign Minister Lavrov of Russia. Brahimi came out and said, remember, only the United the UN Security Council can act. It's not my opinion. He says, I don't tell you what my opinion is. I'll simply tell you what international law is. Without the approval of the UN Security Council, it is illegal. And he reminded people that the goal here was supposed to be to get to Geneva II. So Obama isolated. Obama is left with Hollande, but even Hollande begins to wobble. This shameful position, right? This repudiation of the heritage of General de Gaulle, this shameful operation of Atlanticist and Anglo-Saxon propitiation. Hollande claims on the one side he can prove that Assad did it, but he says he has to wait for the United Nations inspectors to complete that report of theirs. So Hollande is already putting up his own mechanisms of delay, and he says he will only decide after the U.S. Congress votes. So he's got two things that he can wait for. He's stalling. Well, good for him. It's about time he got some sense into his head. The Italian Prime Minister Letta, hanging tough and surprisingly so and commendable, hanging tough against an all-court press by the State Department gang against Susan Rice and Ben Rhodes. Letta has put out that tweet that people have seen, that the divisions in the world over Syria have been confirmed at the meeting. Now, today was Friday, September 6th. We're in the afternoon. More things can happen. But here it goes like this. Obama gave what was described as one of the most ineffective performances, speech and some Q&A, I think, one of the most ineffective performances. This blasé, exhausted, detached, decadent individual seems to sum up in his languid presence all the decadence of imperialism, the Anglo-American mad dog imperialists with their bluster, but ultimately their lack of inner conviction and their lack of moral authority. To the point, again, where John Harwood of CNBC and the Wall Street Journal said this was one of the worst performances that he'd ever seen by Obama. That means worse than the first debate with Romney. And do take a look. However, the big news is Putin. Putin's press conference. This is a landmark in international affairs. It marks the return of Russia definitively. You'll remember last spring when Putin was reelected, I compared it to Roosevelt's third-term victory. Franklin D. Roosevelt, November 1940, a third term, meaning that Hitler would be stopped, and then the return of General de Gaulle in 1957-58. Asked what Russia would do, Putin said, "We will help Syria." Now, that's a big point, needless to say. Here it goes. Will we help Syria, says Putin. I'm quoting. Will we help Syria? We will. And we are already helping. We send arms. We cooperate in the economic sphere. We hope to expand our cooperation in the humanitarian sphere, which includes sending humanitarian aid to support those people, the civilians, who have found themselves in a very dire situation in this country. And that is Putin's press conference after a 20-minute one-on-one with Obama. So the Russian position does not waver. It is rock solid. And all the naysayers, of course, can put that in their pipes and smoke it. But bravo Putin, bravo Lavrov, and so on down the line. And we'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, September 6th in the afternoon. Two important dates coming up. One is on Friday, it's Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, the 13th, 14th, and 15th of September. We have a 9/11 Truth Conference at the Sheraton Pentagon City Hotel near Washington, D.C. This is in Northern Virginia. Sheraton Pentagon City Hotel. Main events are September 14th to 15th. There's something also going on the Friday there, the 13th, and that's 9/11 conference addressed by yours truly. So you can find all of that at the dc911truth.org website. The other one is, especially in these times, more than ever, we have the Russian commemoration, the arrival of the Russian fleets in New York City and in San Francisco on September 24th, 1863, and October 12th, 1863. And I will promise to reveal the actual location next week. But you save the date. Save that entire evening of Tuesday, September 24th. Don't schedule any bowling leagues or sailing outings or anything of the sort. You want to be available in downtown Washington, D.C., September 24th for the entire evening, starting about 7, right? But get there early. So that's going to be an important one. And of course, we take the long view, right? The long view is that the Russian-American relation must be preserved. And we're told that San Francisco has called off the expression of gratitude for saving the United States over some contingent issue about, I think, a profoundly misunderstood Russian law. Well, I think that is a grave short-sightedness, let us say, on the part of some, but not us. So we are happy to go forward with this extremely important commemoration. All right, so the Putin warning, I guess it's going to be called that. This is historical. It's a warning, and I'll just repeat it. Will we help Syria? This means Russia. We will, and we are already helping. We send arms, we cooperate in the economic sphere, and we hope to expand our cooperation in the humanitarian sphere. And he points out that the so-called use of nuclear weapons is a provocation by the rebels in the hopes of obtaining a foreign military intervention. The alleged chemical weapons use in Syria is a provocation carried out by the rebels to attract a foreign-led strike, Putin told the G20 summit. This was not a 50-50 split, but a lopsided balance of some half-hearted dupes and blackmailies and fanatics like Saudi Arabia on the U.S. side, and the vast majority of humanity, the BRICS and more, most of South America, Germany, Italy, not interested in doing any attacks and so forth. So Putin's diplomacy is crowned by success. Obama is isolated, and Putin has the majority of the world on his side. So thank you to Putin for that. It's also interesting, last week there had been, in the past couple of days, talk of a delegation of the Russian Duma, the Russian parliament, which would come to the United States and attempt to start a interparliamentary dialogue with members of the U.S. Congress. And it looks like this has been sabotaged, and we've got to look at Nancy Pelosi, a warmonger Democrat, this Pelosi, refusing to entertain a dialogue of this type. And it simply shows the pathetic weakness of the warmonger position. And it's time for this Pelosi to be dumped. She was a pathetic, ineffective House Speaker, and it was amazing. Her blackmail files, she must have had the help of the FBI to get reelected as the minority leader after she blew that majority with her foolish methods. So Obama is tired and listless. Obama says, well, there's really no dialogue going about Syria. We had to agree to disagree. Now, let's hear a little bit more from Putin. We have a lot from Putin, actually. In addition to the statements of today that Russia will help Syria and that the alleged use of chemical weapons is a provocation by the rebels. This is a categorical statement. This cannot be ignored. This is a great power. It is a superpower. And how these people on American cable television can say, well, everybody agrees that Assad did it. No, they do not agree. The world does not agree. The world rejects you. The world spits you out. And these provincialoids here in Washington, right? You can have provincialism in Podunk, Oklahoma. You can also have plenty of provincialism in a swampy place like Washington, D.C. So we also have, however, which I recommend people to look at, the Putin interview of the day before with the Associated Press. Here, Putin points out, take a look at it. You go to President of Russia. President of Russia is his website. The whole thing, the entire transcript of this is available there in English, and I urge you to look at it. He says, the accusation that the Syrian army would use chemical weapons is simply absurd. Not only is there no evidence, right, as Lavrov says, no names, no dates, no places, no GPS coordinates, no scientific evidence, no tissue, just trust us, we've got it, and we'll talk about that in secret session, as we hear from John Forbes, Skull and Bones, Kerry. But as Putin says, it's absurd to accuse Syria. The Syrian army is winning. They are methodically surrounding the pockets and enclaves of the death squads, and they're reducing those pockets. They're finishing them off. They're mopping up the rebellion. This, of course, explains to some degree why this is happening now, that the West is trying to act to save its terrorist army, its CIA secret army funded by Saudi Arabia in the Middle East. But why would Syria do this? Why take a step that is guaranteed, if it's discovered, to bring down the retribution of the West upon your heads? How does that make any sense? Where's the logic, as he says? Only the UN Security Council can act. Right? Don't say that you're self-appointed sheriff and you're going to enforce the Chemical Weapons Convention. The Chemical Weapons Convention, the more recent one from the 1990s, actually specifies the International Criminal Court of The Hague, the World Court of The Hague. That's who enforces this, not the self-appointed gendarme of the world. And then, perhaps the most interesting, Putin says, oh, the U.S. is huffing and puffing that the chemical weapons have been used and this intolerable. What happens if the rebels are convicted? If the Syrian death squads turn out to be the ones, what will the West do? Will the rebels be bombed? They should be. I think there are a lot of people in the world who think if you're going to bomb anybody, bomb those al-Qaeda death squads. And we'll be back in a minute. Welcome to World Crisis Radio, the Sheraton, Pentagon City, September 13th, 14th, 15th. I'll be speaking on the 14th, on the Saturday. That's DC 9/11 Truth. It's broader than that. The theme it's more than just 9/11. Obviously, we're approaching the 50th anniversary of the Kennedy assassination, and I think this is an opportunity to address this issue, the bedrock issue of the invisible government, the Wall Street gang in the U.S. institutions, the transversal faction that always seems to act for evil with the assassinations and the war provocations and so forth. And then the happier event on Tuesday, September 24th, here in Washington, D.C., Save the Evening. We'll tell you where it is next week on the broadcast. Around 7 p.m. in downtown D.C., the 150th anniversary of the arrival of the Russian fleets in New York City and in San Francisco a little bit later. This is what saved the Union. This is what deterred the attack by Napoleon III of France and by Lord Palmerston, Lord John Russell, and Gladstone of Great Britain, who were itching to intervene. Now, Obama says he's not itching for war. Obama, obviously, they say he's conflicted inside of himself. Get more conflicted, Obama. Back off. And in particular, one of the reasons Obama is bombing at this, he's bombing in the Broadway or Hollywood sense, he's bombing in the sense that his act is not pleasing anybody, is because of these odious, villainous personalities he has with him. Susan Rice, the Viper, and then little Ben Rhodes, who was the TV fakery guy of July 2012. I tried to overthrow the Syrian government by preempting all the Syrian state television programs with CIA television. And, of course, Syrians by now, having been warned, were not fooled. Just a couple of other things from Putin's Associated Press interview. What if the rebels turn out to be the guilty parties? What will the huffing and puffing Obama, Kerry, Rice team do under those circumstances? Putin notes that he is not defending a specific government, but rather international law as such. And it is the intention of Russia to respect contracts for military deliveries. He's asked about the S-300. He says, well, we have the S-300. We here in Russia have already deployed the S-400, and we are about to deploy the S-500. But he says the S-300 is already pretty good, better than the Patriot system, says the irrepressible Putin. He was also asked in this interview, if the U.S. attacks Syria, will you fight? And he asks then the Associated Press correspondent, are you the employee of a news service or are you the employee of the CIA? That's an interesting question. More people should ask these U.S. prostitutes what their story is. The other point that we have from Putin today is the question of the smaller countries. He brings this up, I think, in a highly significant way. The little countries, the smaller countries of the world, essentially are confronted now with international anarchy. That there are certain great powers, the United States above all, but also France, right, and the British if they could. Those seem to be the main three offenders, that they can roll over any small country they want. They can bomb Libya, they can bomb Syria, they can attack Iraq, they can do Afghanistan, again, without anything happening necessarily in the UN Security Council. So the international anarchy, not only does Putin, I think, have the support of the big players, right, the BRICS, right, Brazil, India, China, South Africa, big countries. But then there are also the smaller ones, right? Think of all the European countries, right? Belgium, Netherlands, Denmark, Norway, right? Sweden, Finland, places like this. Who's going to take care of them, right? What if they get into the crosshairs one day? So he regrets the regional destabilization that will come from an attack. He also joins China in pointing out that the oil price will go through the roof, that this will be a grave threat to the world economic recovery. That is, of course, the pre-assigned topic of this conference. The Russians are pointing out that it's Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the British who are most enthusiastic for a U.S. attack, right? Again, they're the ones who are willing and eager to fight to the last American. But the main thing is the rebels did it. It's a provocation, and there we have it. Now, Obama is facing this vote. We'll talk about that in just a second. But the question is, if Obama loses the vote, will he press ahead and create a total constitutional crisis, very likely courting his own impeachment? Because if he's defeated, he'll be defeated in the House, most likely. And the same majority that would defeat him in the House, with a couple of changes, would become a majority to impeach him. And I'm just stating a fact, right? I'm at arm's length from that. I'm not a part of the House of Representatives. I'm just telling you what is going to happen. So if you care about Obama and his agenda, or think the agenda might get better, he's got to back off from this. And backing off means fire Susan Rice, fire Kerry, fire Ben Rhodes, clean house in that place, the Augean stables, get every warmonger and lunatic, and fire Samantha Power. That's the other one from this week. Samantha Power, sporting the ravaged look, I would say, the war harridan, Samantha Power, comes out saying that the Russians have taken the UN Security Council as hostages, and they're preventing any progress. For this woman, progress means progress towards World War III. She should be in the loony bin. She should be committed. This is what happens when insane people take over important public posts. Anyway, Mrs. Cass Sunstein, because that's who she is, Mrs. Cass Sunstein should resign. She should be impeached. She should be fired. We should have demonstrations at the UN. Get her out of there. This cannot be the face of the United States, right? This is a dilettante. The military people can't stand her. She's abrasive. She's moralistic, right? She's also foul-mouthed, as we saw with her tirade against Hillary back in the primaries of 2008, when she had to step back into the shadows before being dredged up again by Obama. This is the liberal interventionist crew. These are the humanitarian warmongers, and we don't want them. Now, the other thing is Hollande of France. It's important that he says France has to wait for the inspectors. He does not say France has to wait for the UN Security Council, although the spokesman, the primary debater for the UMP, the Sarkozy party, right, the right-wing or conservative party in France, during the debate in the French National Assembly on Wednesday, pointed out once again to Hollande, if you make this attack without the UN Security Council, that is illegal, and you should not do it. Unfortunately, in this case, the Fifth Republic Constitution allows Hollande to wage war for 4 months without any consultation in the form of a vote. So the French did not get to vote. This is a shameful situation. The British get a vote. Even the U.S. gets a vote. But the poor French don't get a vote. You got to do something about that. Maybe a general strike is the answer where you can vote with your feet. But, of course, since Hollande is from the Socialist International, the Yellow International, as it was known, it was the Yellow International because they were the ones who supported the war credits of World War I. Anyway, it's time for the French to redouble their efforts, take advantage of this stalling, and go forward on that. And we'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Now we're going to just turn away from the St. Petersburg, Syria, Russia, France, and related dossier and turn to U.S. domestic, and above all, the fact that we've got the New York City mayoral primary is now next Tuesday, and it's time to turn out and vote big for Randy Credico, the tax Wall Street candidate, the guy who's going to put a 0.5% turnover tax, a Wall Street sales tax on the Wall Street transactions in stocks, bonds, and derivatives. So for this, we're going to go to Daniela Walls. Daniela, we got 10 minutes, and I'm afraid that's it because of the international event.
I'll rush through it.
Please do.
There's a few days before the September 10th Democratic primaries, this Tuesday, so a couple days left. De Blasio has now cracked the 40% mark. He's at 43% in the polls and appears headed for a first-round victory, which means there won't be a primary runoff. It looks like de Blasio is going to take this race. If the winner of the primary tops 40% of the vote, then they are automatically the nominee. The rest are pretty far behind him now. Thompson is in second with about 20%. Quinn, who was leading early on, is now at 17%. Anthony Weiner has plummeted from 11 to 7, and Lou is at 4. Only 8% are undecided. So at this late hour, we are urging everyone to contact who they know in New York City and convince them to cast a protest vote for Randy. People can also immediately start tweeting and Facebooking to vote for Randy with a link to his website or any program points they want to share. Increasing Randy's votes now will give him and the Tax Wall Street Party momentum heading into the general election. I'll post tweets and Facebook posts that you can share. I'm Daniela G. Walls on Facebook and Twitter, DanielaGwalls. There will be posts all this week to share from my page or from Randy's Facebook page. It's Randy Credico for Mayor of New York City. Also, the content on his website is shareable at credico2013.org. So I'm going to keep going with some information about de Blasio from this week.
Yeah, let's get some profile about this dirty guy de Blasio, the Soros candidate, and what he really represents. Right? We got to somehow demystify
let me tell you, because it's obvious to me from de Blasio's surge in the polls that New Yorkers aren't paying attention to the issues in this campaign or doing any digging past this media hype. Because this week it came out that de Blasio came to the aid of one of the city's worst slumlords, this guy Michael Shaw, who had hundreds of housing code violations. And it turns out this guy Shaw also contributed the maximum amount to de Blasio's campaign and helped facilitate raising additional funds. So de Blasio went to bat for Shaw. He set up a meeting with the Housing Preservation Deputy Commissioner to remove Shaw's code violations. And Shaw, according to the New York Daily News, is one of the worst slumlords in the city. De Blasio took over $50,000 in this campaign so far from the city's worst slumlords. And then he took the names of some of them off his own city's worst landlords list. De Blasio uses his role as a public official, Webster, and the threat of his office to either expose slumlords or hide slumlords. The scandal being that he raised money from people who didn't want to end up on his list. And here's something interesting. That none of the other candidates have talked about it yet, and I'm not sure they even know about it. Darcy Richardson and I uncovered it this week. But de Blasio had a job in the Clinton White House as regional director for the Department of Housing and Urban Development for New York and New Jersey. That was his post from 1997 to 2000, precisely the period when HUD experienced a major scandal involving a rehab loan scam that fleeced HUD out of federally insured loans far greater than the value of the properties they were rehabbing. This involved This is a similar thing to what he wants to do with his affordable housing plan. He wants to rehab some of the units and not just build units. So this involved the 203K program and happened under de Blasio's watch. De Blasio has real estate scandals everywhere he goes. This is not the guy to put in charge of an affordable housing plan, Webster. One mortgage company alone was involved in a $70 million scam under de Blasio's watch. Then de Blasio quickly leaves HUD to manage Hillary Clinton's U.S. Senate campaign in 2000. And so he's tied to the Clintons at the hip, and he's also tied to Obama. De Blasio's campaign manager is Bill Hires, one of Obama's campaign managers. So de Blasio is a total DLC Democratic establishment hack. De Blasio,
a right-wing Wall Street Democrat, and probably a warmonger.
De Blasio is as establishment Webster as they come. He's not a progressive. The DLC is a conservative Democratic organization, like more, you know what I mean, like more center-right than progressive. And Clinton came out of the DLC. So Tony Podesta, Clinton's closest confidant, and Hillary's lobbyist Janice Enright held de Blasio's first campaign fundraisers. So the Clintons have been pushing de Blasio from early on. And de Blasio is mouthing the right words, but that seems to be enough for people. People don't dig. Obviously, I don't know if even so his opponents are digging because nobody revealed his HUD record, which is, I can't go into it now, but there's a million scandals in that. And then the real scandal in this race is how de Blasio is going to finance his proposed affordable housing plan, Webster. He claims he wants to build 200,000 units of affordable housing. And notice that he uses the word affordable, like affordable for whom. I can tell you these won't be affordable for people making the $7 minimum wage. The most expensive city in the world has a $7.25 minimum wage, which is, de Blasio's campaign promise is to hike this to $9. This is disgusting. This affordable housing is a plan for further gentrification and
there we go.
An invitation for real estate backroom deals that de Blasio always seems to be involved in. Randy's plan is to pay for low-income housing development with a 0.5% Wall Street sales tax. Here's the scandal with de Blasio's plan. He wants to direct $1 billion in city pension funds to build these units, $1 billion from the city pension funds. So the problem is that right now, New York City has one of the country's largest unfunded public pension liabilities. Liabilities means that what are owed to current and future retirees. New York City's pension plan is already massively underfunded, and yet he still wants to take $1 billion out of that for his own private development interests and to line his buddy developers' pockets. Randy's plan is to pay for housing by taxing Wall Street, right? So de Blasio is getting the money by stealing it from retirees. Like, this is nuts. As of a few years ago, New York City had more than $62 billion in unfunded public pensions, and the figure is even higher now. In other words, they are not funding a big chunk of their current obligations. Yet de Blasio wants to exacerbate this problem by taking money out of out of the public worker pensions. Randy's Wall Street sales tax would bring in double the city's existing annual budget, and none of this would be an issue.
It would be double the existing budget at minimum, because the actual amount of derivatives transactions is still not known in spite of Dodd-Frank. It's not reportable. It will become reportable, and then we'll see what we've got.
Yeah, we're using the very, very conservative estimate.
Right.
But it will bring with a conservative estimate is about $60 billion. But
okay, now we're convinced. Again, what do we do to support Credico?
Oh, okay. Well, whatever people can donate will be deeply appreciated. We have no salaries or anything like that, and we're stretching every dollar. There's a donate button on the homepage of Randy's website at credico2013.org. You can also donate to the Tax Wall Street Party at taxwallstreetparty.org, TAXWALLSTREETPARTY.org. We don't have a lot of money, so we need as much grassroots volunteerism as possible. If you can volunteer, please contact me at taxwallstreetparty@gmail.com or fill out a volunteer sign-up form on either credico2013.org or taxwallstreetparty.org. That's what I've got.
And again, people can vote twice. This is the wonderful enlightened situation in New York State. You can vote once for Credico as a Democrat next Tuesday, and then you can vote for him again at the Tax Wall Street Party. He's on the ballot for November 5th. So this is a serious, sustained effort that's not going away, and we will get the Wall Street sales tax on the national agenda. Thanks, Daniela.
Thank you.
Always.
Thank you.
We'll see you next week. We want to hear great news about the kickoff of the second phase.
Of the Tax Wall Street phase.
Of the
Bye-bye,
Tax
Webster.
Wall Street. Bye-bye. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio, Webster Tarpley in Washington, D.C. So imagine this. The great power, the superpower Russia, warns the United States, don't be dragged into war by a cynical provocation by al-Qaeda terrorist rebels seeking to con you and use you for an attack. And in the background, as was pointed out, the Saudis, the British, and the degenerate emir of Qatar, or Qatar, as we call it, right, the patron of Al Jazeera. So it is time now to stop with this cable TV talk. Nobody questions that the rebels did it. They certainly do. The majority of the world rejects this fantastic story. It was, in short, a false flag operation. A false flag operation, a terrorist provocation, cynically conducted by the rebels, we'll go through how, and then attributed to the Assad government. Maybe what Zbigniew Brzezinski was warning about in his testimony to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee at the very beginning of 2007, when it looked like Iran might be the target. And guess what? Iran still is, because the attack on Syria is the first step towards an attack on Hezbollah in Lebanon, a very formidable military group. Ask the Israelis about how effective Hezbollah is. Hezbollah has defeated the Israelis on 2+ occasions. Defeated. The Israeli supermen went down to defeat at the hands of Hezbollah. Don't mess with Hezbollah, and don't mess with Iran, 3 to 4 times the size of Iraq in terms of population and area. And certainly the combination of Lebanon and Syria and Iran, and then Iraq, let's also point out, at the meeting of the Arab League, here's another ignominious failure by the incompetent Kerry and the bungler Susan Rice, right? The mad dogs who are also the gang that can't get anything right. This is now the meeting of the Arab League a couple of days ago. They could not get a warmonger resolution through there. They could not get a call to attack Syria. Rather, the no's came from Egypt, the biggest Arab state, Algeria, tremendously important country, and Lebanon and Jordan, lower profile, but Jordan pathetically whining that they don't expect their territory, they won't allow it to be used for the attack to be conducted. So there are a bunch of very big no countries, and Iraq. Iraq also voted no. So there's no attack resolution. Kerry is a liar. I want to thank Lavrov and Putin especially for exposing that Kerry, Skull and Bones Kerry, is a liar. Now, in his testimony, right, Kerry had one day at the Senate Foreign Relations and then the House Foreign Relations the following day. This person, look into those eyes, and I think you see something demonic and satanic, coherent with the fact that he's a member of the Skull and Bones death cult up at Yale, which has brought us so much misery here in the United States. Without McCloy, without Stimson, without Lovett, without Harrison, without Bundy, we would not have had Pearl Harbor. We would not have had the dropping of the atomic bomb on Japan. We would not have had the Japanese in the concentration camps. Without Harriman and the younger generation of Bundys, without Averell Harriman, William Bundy, and McGeorge Bundy of the Kennedy National Security Council, we would not have had the Vietnam War. Without McGeorge Bundy at the National Security Council, we might not have had the Kennedy assassination, right? That's his job. If his job was national security, looks like he blew it. The Kennedy assassination was obviously very bad for national security. And then, of course, the ones that everybody remembers, Mad Dog Bush the Elder, George H.W. Bush, the First Gulf War, and George W. Bush, Mad Dog Jr., they're responsible for the Iraq War and the Afghan War and, of course, 9/11 on their watch. So this is the Skull and Bones tradition, and there's more than just that. But now, look, in his testimony, Kerry said, the terrorists, the al-Qaeda forces in the Syrian opposition are a mere 15 to 25%. Well, that's, of course, that should not give us pause, right? If they take 15 to 25% of Syria and make that into a terrorist emirate, what difference does that make? And they can launch attacks out over the Mediterranean towards Europe or into the southern parts of Russia. I don't know. It's much more, of course. The official, as the congressman pointed out immediately, real time, it's at least 50%, and it's probably more, because the greater criminal energy, the greater fanaticism and so forth is on the side of these lunatics. So Kerry lied, yes, and Putin is right that he lied. Let me just point out, though, here's another one where Kerry lied on something even closer to home for Kerry. If you watched MSNBC last night with Chris Hayes, you get the response from Kerry is essentially to say, I'm not a warmonger. Look at me. I'm not a warmonger. Obama's not a warmonger. Obama was against wars, right? He tried to shut down wars. And as for myself, Kerry, and as for my colleague Hagel over at the Defense Department, we were opposed to George Bush's decision to start the attack on Iraq in 2003. He gives you the idea that he was opposed to the Iraq war. He is lying. This is where people have got to get him. The vote in question is called the Authorization for Use of Military Force Against Iraq Resolution of 2002. Public Law 107-243 and so forth. Passed by the Congress. It was George Bush. It started off as House Joint Resolution 114. It passed in the House on October 10th, 2002, and in the Senate October 11th by a vote of 77 to 23. Now, in the Senate, 22 Democrats voted no, to their credit. 28 warmonger Democrats voted yes, 56% of the delegation, including Senator Hillary Clinton, warmonger. Senator John Kerry, warmonger. And that's what we need for our purposes here. Kerry voted for war. And not only war, but the authorization to use military force is the fountainhead of all of the abuses. That, along with the Patriot Act, that is where your privacy and all of your domestic civil rights went. That's a declaration of war in effect. So after that, the regime can do whatever they want. Therefore, Kerry is a liar. He is indicted in the court of public opinion as a pathological liar. And if you listen to that testimony of his, you'll hear all other kinds of lies, right? How many countries support you? How many countries can you guarantee will be in the shooting war, standing next to you and shooting and being shot at? The answer is actually zero, because France is too wobbly to be counted. And as for the rest of these places, we're in the Levant, right? The Turks and the Saudis. Watch out for them. Their promises are written in the water of the Eastern Mediterranean, let us say. So these people have to go. Rice, Kerry, and we might as well throw in Ben Rhodes, the amateur strategist. Imagine Ben Rhodes, who thinks that wars can be won with television, right? When the populations are actually aroused. Now let's look at the political predicament of the regime. Having chosen between last Friday and Saturday to take the road of consulting the Congress, attempting to get a rubber stamp. At the point that he did it, he was considered erratic on Saturday afternoon. Obama was widely viewed as having somehow lost control of himself, that he had to pull back from the abyss of bombing, thought to be beginning last Saturday to Sunday, and look for an out, or look for cover and or an out. And we'll get to that in just a minute here on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Now let's look at the congressional votes. Now I have to caveat this point that we have conflicting stories here, and I think some of it, there's certain reticence to actually count the votes because it looks very bad for Obama and the warmonger side, and the entire Beltway elite is committed to this attack. It is very, very interesting. In addition to the normal reactionary Republican versus Wall Street Democrat divide, right, this dog and pony show to some degree, there's also a real conflict here, elite versus American people. Think of Feinstein, who said, yeah, it's true, in my town hall meetings, they all tell me don't do it, but then again, they don't know what I know. This is fundamentally a violation of the American spirit, right, that somehow there's an elite that knows best, right? That we leave that to European monarchies and European courts and what have you. But Feinstein out there, decadent Democrat that she is, she believes that. And, the word we have is from Congressman Grayson. Congressman Grayson is interested in this because he's actually whipping the vote against Obama. Grayson has taken advantage of Obama's speech in Sweden. Obama in Sweden said, my credibility is not on the line. The credibility of the international community is on the line. So fine, says Grayson. You're off the hook. We can do what we want. We're going to vote our consciences. Grayson has actually said that Pelosi is unlikely to whip a matter of war and peace. I think Pelosi probably will. She'll have Salon Kitty coming out, right, and the whatever else in order to try to get the votes. But this is going to be very hard. The subtext of this entire segment is mobilize, mobilize, mobilize. Emails, calls, letters to the congressional offices. Everybody's got 2 senators and 1 congressman. That's a total of 9 to 12 phone calls you need to make. Do it, and you'll sleep the sleep of the just. And do it now. Do it on the weekend and into Monday. The votes probably begin around the middle of next week. It's quite possible that the vote in the Senate will come on September 11th. So on the 12th anniversary of the September 11th attacks, the U.S. Congress, the Senate, having made the fake 9/11 story, right? The 9/11 big lie has become a civic religion, but then in spite of that civic religion, the Senate will vote to support al-Qaeda, to intervene in the civil war on the side of al-Qaeda killers, many of whom have killed U.S. forces in Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia, and God knows where else, right? These all-purpose killers. So the whip. Grayson says that the phone calls against the war coming into Congress are on the order of 100 to 1 against the war. There are other estimates that make it 15 to 1 or 20 to 1. Fine. So from 15 to 1 to 100 to 1 against the war. There are other town hall meetings, right? McCain's town hall meeting. Congressman Jerry Connolly here also got his head handed to him at a town hall meeting. Let me point out that Connolly, especially treacherous, here in the Washington, D.C. area, we have two profiles in treachery. We've got Jerry Connolly out there in the Virginia suburbs, who is on the Foreign Relations Committee. And then we've got Congressman Van Hollen here in the Maryland side, and they're cooperating to have a kind of a fake, it's a deception motion. It says only one round of strikes, strictly limited. Let me just point this out. People have got to learn what Russia learned and the world learned in March of 2011. If you vote for any resolution of any kind that has any tiny door for military action, even if it's 5 seconds of bombing and nothing more, that will give you the big war. Because through that door, however tiny, the warmongers will come piling through. You give them that centimeter, that millimeter, and they will take megaparsecs of distance to wage war, light years of distance to wage war. So therefore, the only conceivable position is no, no, no. No to military action under any circumstances. No air attack, no land attack, no subversion, no teams on the ground, no sneakers on the ground, no high heels on the ground, no sandals on the ground, no boots on the ground, no wingtips on the ground, no, nothing on the ground, nothing in the air, nothing in the water, nothing in outer space, nothing underground, no, no, no. So Grayson says, again, the Democratic congressmen, he says, are going 4 to 1 against war. And the Republicans are going 10 to 1 against war. I welcome the efforts of the reactionary Republicans, although I do not join them, because we'll be fighting them again within a couple of weeks on questions of medical care for the American people, and also questions of the budget and of the debt ceiling. But anyway, we've heard in the past day or two, I have heard things that go like this. One count gives 199 no votes, with almost all of them, all but 5 are House Republicans, and 40 yes votes. Here's another count, which goes like this. 204 no votes and 143 undecided, with 124 yes votes. Now, if that one is true, even if the undecided go for war on a 9 to 1 basis, we would still get to the minimum necessary to block the warmonger resolution. And that is right now, because of the way the House is populated, there are 2 vacancies in the House. So therefore, the magic number is 217. There are now 230. 200. It's actually. I'm sorry. It's 400 and 433 are in there because of the 2 vacancies. So 217 is the magic number. 217 stops it unless a special election is held next Tuesday and that person takes office. I don't think that's on the agenda, but we'll find out. In any case, don't leave it to chance. Don't sit back and think that because a Democrat seems to be reasonable, don't trust them. They're snakes. And one of the things, of course, this shows is that the Democratic Party is useless and that we need the tax Wall Street Party. We need an outside force out of the control of the Democratic Party to enforce this. But anyway, that is the grim story. And most of the large mainstream media are afraid of that. So therefore, be encouraged, but mobilize, organize like hell. And we'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Now, the House of Representatives looks very bad for the warmongers. And again, any reason to oppose this war bill, to oppose Obama, Kerry, Rice, Ben Rhodes, and this entire gang, those are good reasons. So we're not going to look too closely into that, although we don't share the motivation of these reactionaries and indeed racists that are undoubtedly going to be in there. That's okay, right? Man meant it for ill, God meant it for good. And that's the way that the universe has survived until now. However, we also have to look at the Senate. Now, here we have quite a number of important people. Joe Manchin of West Virginia has covered himself with honor by announcing he will vote no. This is a conservative Democrat, so it means the entire camp of the conservative Democrats are facilitated in turning away from the brink of the abyss. And undoubtedly there are others. The new congressman the new senator from Connecticut, Murphy, I believe, turns out to be okay. And there are some others. But here's the thing we have to point to. Rand Paul carries on the tradition of duplicity of the Paul-tards, the Paul-bearers, the Paul clan. You'll remember that his father, Ron Paul, ran for president in 2008 and in 2012 on the basis of a peace candidacy, no intervention in foreign countries. But nevertheless, his actual function was as an auxiliary, a right wingman and helper for the warmonger Mitt Romney. And we better thank our lucky stars. We don't have Mitt Romney in the White House right now. Better Obama than Romney. I'd be happier to deal with Obama with all of his conflicted interiority and his pathos and what have you. Romney would have none of that. You'd already be up to your neck in a general Middle East war with Romney, and maybe a war with Russia, with Romney carrying out the oath of vengeance against the American people and also carrying out the White Horse prophecy against Russia, that's the apocalyptic Armageddon of these maniacs. So we're glad we don't have that. But we have Obama, and this has now got to be opposed. Now, the problem with the Pauls, Rand Paul had hinted, maybe not pledged, but hinted that he would filibuster this war bill, and that's what he should do. If Rand Paul is serious, which I sincerely doubt, given the family tradition of duplicity and treachery, let's see Rand Paul get out there and filibuster. He showed us, with Brennan, if Brennan became the head of the CIA because of rendition and torture and drones, I guess it was only drones for him, really, that was the end of the world. So he's out there for 12 to 14 hours with his Depends and his special shoes, his insoles. What has he got? Is he chilling? But he was out there, and he got a big name for himself as a filibuster artist. Now we come to a question of constitutional legality and the destiny of the United States of America. And little Rand pulls back. He's not going to filibuster. All of you Paul-tards out there, get on the horn to little Rand. Bombard him with email. Filibuster is the only acceptable thing. We can't have one tortured little vote at the end of the day. That's no good. I would also appeal to people like Ted Cruz, right? The other leading libertarian reactionary, supposedly anti-war. Ted Cruz says he's against it too. Ted Cruz, little Rand has gotten ahead of you in media attention and many, many other things. You've got to outflank him on the radical side. You filibuster it. Force little Rand to come through. Let me talk about a couple of things. Mitch McConnell has been silent as a tomb because he is a parliamentary cretin, of course, but he's afraid of a Tea Party challenger, which he has in Kentucky. Now, if little Rand wanted to do something for peace and wanted to be radical about it, right? If he took it seriously, if he believed his own rhetoric or stood behind his own rhetoric, he would say to McConnell, look, McConnell, I want you to come out condemning this war resolution, announce that you're going to vote against it, and that you're going to whip the Republican senators to oppose it, to block it. Don't let it go through. And McConnell, little Rand, could say, if you don't do that, I will condemn you and invite people to vote for your Tea Party challenger in the Republican primary, which is coming up now in a couple of months. That is where you would force the minority leader of the Democrats in the Senate to line up against the war, which otherwise he's not going to do in any effective way, at least not in time. So this is the test for Rand Paul, right? Remember, we had Rand Paul endorsing Romney. A lot of people were shocked. I wasn't shocked. That's exactly what the Paul clan was doing. And when I put this on Twitter, I'm just amazed at the stubborn desire of people to be stupid and to be duped. It's the hunger to be duped. We saw it among leftists, the desire to be duped by Obama. And now with the right-wingers, the reactionaries, the libertarians, their desire, their hunger to be duped by somebody like Rand Paul. Now, that's some idea. Now, it's also the ideological fronts are highly interesting. Grayson is doing a great job. McCain, of course, he should be committed to the loony bin. We have Congressman Ellison, our one Muslim congressman, is supporting the attack, as far as I can see. That's the head of the Progressive Caucus. What's up with that? Time to get him out of there. Even the Progressive Caucus, of course, split. Ms. Fudge of the Black Caucus has told the Black Caucus to shut up. Don't say anything. But that has not prevented some courageous people like Congressman Meeks and Congressman Rangel, Charlie Rangel of Harlem. He's got a grudge, obviously. He was Watergated out of his chairmanship of the House Ways and Means Committee. That would have been a good thing to keep him there. But Obama not only didn't support him, but Obama joined in. Obama was party to the attempt to oust every black committee chairman between 2009 and 2011 when the Democrats had the majority. On television, you see an interesting split. MSNBC is split, I think, pretty much down the middle. Ed Schultz, laboring to some extent for peace. Chris Hayes, supposedly for peace, but the content is warmongering. And Maddow, I don't know. On Fox, Hannity is anti-war. He's not really anti-war. He wants a much bigger war or no war. That's also the position of Krauthammer today in the Washington Post. If it's Obama's pinprick strategy, then don't do it. O'Reilly, trying to be a centrist, he's for war. But we've got even the Strangeloves, of course, are split. So these are all interesting questions. Remember, Anthony Blinken, the security aide of Biden, and I always have to add, this is Anthony Blinken from the law firm of Winken, Blinken, and Nod. He says that Obama will respect the congressional vote, and if they vote no, he will back off from the attack. Well, he better, because, again, that same House majority can then turn around and impeach him, and that won't look good either, will it? That would be a terrible constitutional crisis. None of this is worth it. From the point of view of Obama also, what should Obama be doing right now? Obama should be out doing public events urging people to sign up for Obamacare. He should be building a case to crush the Republicans on the budget, that they do have to fund food stamps. He should back off, obviously, from his infamous chained consumer price index, from his attempt to attack Social Security and other federal benefits and so forth. A couple of other things to note. The New York Times, I guess, trying to make us forget Judith Miller, which we won't, but on the 5th, Thursday, yesterday, the New York Times had a very shocking film of an atrocity carried out by the Death Squad rebels, living up to their name. They assassinated 7 Syrian army draftees, POWs. How's that for a cultural norm? Don't assassinate, don't execute prisoners of war. That's even more basic Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Got to cram in a bunch of points here in the last segment. That New York Times picture and film, front page picture and video film, the Death Squad rebels, the Al-Qaeda people that Obama wants to help and that Kerry wants to whitewash, they assassinated before your eyes 7 draftees, young kids of the Syrian army. Now, we're told by Obama and Kerry that there's this cultural norm of international customary law that chemical weapons cannot be used. Well, I got another cultural norm. How about that you don't execute prisoners of war? People that have been captured are not executed. How about the Battle of the Bulge when the Nazis executed a bunch of U.S. troops that they'd captured, machine-gunned them in a field? That didn't go down too well, did it? So you also got to add, if they do it to you, is that a serious war crime? Apparently, the administration has got their moral compass lost. The other news we have on the inside, the Syrian rebels, always eager to offend the West as much as they can. We have a village called Malula. I've gone by there, not been in it, but on the road north from Damascus, Malula, it is a place where the Aramaic language is spoken. Aramaic is the language spoken, according to most estimates, by Jesus Christ. Christ spoke Aramaic. This village of Malula is a largely Christian, Orthodox and or Catholic and or Melkite village, which is now under attack by the Death Squad rebels. And in the coverage on this, we saw Sister Agnès Myriam de la Croix, who is a very brave lady that I had the honor to know at the monastery of Saint James, Saint-Jacques l'Interstitier, Saint James, the torture victim in Kara, also on the road between Damascus and Homs. So these people are the linguistic heirs of Christ in terms of village and family. And who knows, biologically, there may be also some connections, right? If you had the DNA, you could test it. So the other thing we should point out, bribery. Look at my website, tarpley.net. I received and was happy to make available here in the United States an article from the Russian Near East Review, publication by a scholar, Dr. Titov, T-I-T-O-V, and it is that the Saudis and the Qataris are engaged in a campaign, a massive campaign of bribery, big money, and this is huge bribes to individual U.S. officials, people who flip, watch them. They are getting big money behind the scenes from the Saudis. There are federal prosecutions here that are going to be carried out if we live that long. Bribery is forbidden. The Constitution forbids federal officers from receiving bribes and or objects of value and or titles of nobility from foreign princes, potentates, and so forth. This includes the royal houses, so-called, of Saudi Arabia, and the emir of Qatar. The emir of the Qatar is apparently coughing up some cash. So take a look at that, and that puts this entire thing in a different framework. And for those of you who have been dreading that voice of Hillary Clinton, that sound of the nails being scratched across the chalkboard, the cackling, well, according to a completely different source, a mainstream MSN report, Hillary Clinton took $500,000 worth of jewelry from the degenerate Saudi royal family. Hillary Clinton has come out in the background supporting the attack. She's a warmonger. She has learned nothing. She lost the presidential nomination because of her stubborn warmonger vote in 2002 and her stubborn warmonger determination not to apologize or repudiate that vote. So Hillary Clinton has now got a $500,000 albatross of white gold studded with sapphires and rubies from the king of Saudi Arabia. That's what's around her neck. So bad news. And this, you haven't heard the last of this. You'll get more, but go to tarpley.net. And, of course, as I should have been pointing out more during the broadcast, Webster G. Tarpley Twitter feed is simply indispensable because you can't keep up with this stuff unless you've got the Twitter feed. For example, on Saturday afternoon, I went down to the demonstrations at the White House from the Answer Coalition. Do take a look at the Answer Coalition. If that's the only demonstration in town, well, then by all means go to it. Take your own political identity, your own signs, your own leaflets, and everything else. But join in, of course. Now, if we can, let me just try to put this Putin question into perspective. Putin is carrying out a program of war avoidance. I think the figure of Putin right now deserves study. He is, in a way, showing us he is an exception to the crisis of the human personality and the eclipse of reason that we see in our own time. In other words, this harkens back to the concept of man that we had in the Italian Renaissance or in German Weimar classicism, right? The notion that human greatness is at least available. This is a program of war avoidance, and I want to relate it then to the Russian fleets coming to the United States in 1863. The policy in those days, in the 1860s, was set by Tsar Alexander II, great person, as the freer, the liberator of the serfs, and also as somebody who began launching the industrial development of the Russian Empire on the basis of protectionism. And it's a protectionism that has much in common with that of Friedrich List and Henry Clay and Henry Carey. And it was brought over there by Cassius Marcellus Clay of Kentucky, cousin of Henry Clay, Lincoln's ambassador to Russia. In August of 1879, long after these events, Alexander II had a talk with Wharton Barker, an American who was a financial agent of the Russian Empire. And the Tsar pointed out that the Russian policy was a policy designed to preserve peace. And I think this is what we see now reflected in Putin. He points out that in 1860-1863, the British and the French were threatening to intervene in the American Civil War on the side of the Confederacy. The Tsar said, when they asked me, if they had asked me, I would have refused to join in an English-French attack on the United States. Quite the contrary, I would have told them that their attack would be considered casus belli for the Russian Empire. In other words, you British, you French, you attack Lincoln, I'll be at war with you. So he says, I avoided that war, says the Tsar. He prevented the British and the French from attacking simply by making this statement. Then later on, these things are perhaps less known, but he says, in 1864, there was a war between Austria and Prussia on the one side and Denmark on the other. This is the issue of the provinces of Schleswig-Holstein. So he said, I made it clear to the British and the French that if they intervened to support Denmark against Prussia and Austria, they would be in deep trouble with the Russian Empire, and they backed down. So therefore, he helped Bismarck. We'll see why he helped Bismarck. Then he says, in 1866, Bismarck created the North German Confederation, excluding Austria, right, after the defeat of Austria in the 7 Weeks' War. And the big question was, would France attack Prussia? We know that Edward VII, in those days, the Prince of Wales, was in favor, and lots of British oligarchs were in favor of attacking and having the French do so. And he said the fact that France was silent meant that France did not intervene. And he said, I did this to create a European balance of power against the British. And then he says, in 1870, I told the British and the Austrians that if they tried to save Napoleon III against Bismarck, Russia would intervene on the side of Prussia, and that wider war did not occur. Finally, in the 1870s, reversing himself, he said Bismarck was looking for quarrels with France, but the fear of Russia stopped him. So if you say, what's the continuity? It's that it's a war avoidance policy. It avoids a wider war. Let's hope that somebody, some statesman somewhere in the world will understand that that is what Putin is driving at. It is a war avoidance policy, and we hope that it will be effective. So, September 24th, been confirmed at the meeting. Now, today was Friday, September 6th. We're in the afternoon. More things can happen. But here it goes like this. Obama gave what was described as one of the most ineffective performances, speech and some Q&A, I think. One of the most ineffective performances. This blasé, exhausted, detached, decadent individual seems to sum up in his languid presence all the decadence of imperialism, the Anglo-American mad dog imperialists with their bluster, but ultimately their lack of inner conviction and their lack of moral authority. To the point, again, where John Harwood of CNBC and the Wall Street Journal said this is one of the worst performances that he'd ever seen by Obama. That means worse than the first debate with Romney. And do take a look. However, the big news is Putin. Putin's press conference. This is a landmark in international affairs. It marks the return of Russia definitively. You'll remember last spring when Putin was reelected, I compared it to Roosevelt's third-term victory, Franklin D. Roosevelt, November 1940, a third term, meaning that Hitler would be stopped, and then the return of General de Gaulle in 1957-58. Asked what Russia would do, Putin said, "We will help Syria." Now, that's a big point, needless to say. Here it goes. Will we help Syria, says Putin. I'm quoting. Will we help Syria? We will. And we are already helping. We send arms. We cooperate in the economic sphere. We hope to expand our cooperation in the humanitarian sphere, which includes sending humanitarian aid to the Council, made an appeal last night, Thursday evening, the 5th of September, at the special Syria dinner at the Peterhof. She made a special appeal to Obama to back off from military force. Obama adamant. No, he's going to push ahead. So Russia with Putin, and we'll go into the Russian position in some detail. China, anti-war. India. Notice, this is already much of the population and land surface of the world. Russia, China, India, they're joined by South Africa, and the president of South Africa, apparently an eloquent voice for peace. Indonesia, adamantly against war. Argentina and Brazil against war and fed up with the excesses of the United States, right, which they might have known about, but now they're embarrassed by having it come out in public. And in addition to this, the general lineup is the BRICS as a whole, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, are against this lunatic military adventure, this leap into the dark or leap into the abyss, as we might describe it. His Holiness Francis the First, the Roman Pope, has pointed out that the quest for a military solution is futile. This is a much stronger statement than the previous appeals for peace that the Pope has made. I think the Vatican has become aware of the criminal energy behind the U.S. Aggressive push. Even such figures as Van Rompuy and Barroso, the two top Eurocrats and Eurogarchs of the European Commission, they're also telling Obama to back off. And, of course, in the background, we've got Anders Fogh Rasmussen, the NATO Secretary General, for those people, the civilians, who have found themselves in a very dire situation in this country. And that is Putin's press conference after a 20-minute one-on-one with Obama. So the Russian position does not waver. It is rock solid. And all the naysayers, of course, can put that in their pipes and smoke it. But bravo Putin, bravo Lavrov, and so on down the line. And we'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, September 6th in the afternoon. Two important dates coming up. One is on Friday, it's Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, the 13th, 14th, and 15th of September. We have a 9/11 Truth Conference at the Sheraton Pentagon City Hotel near Washington, D.C. This is in Northern Virginia. Sheraton Pentagon City Hotel. Main events are September 14th to 15th. There's something also going on the Friday there, the 13th, and that's 9/11 conference addressed by yours truly. So you can find all of that at the dc911truth.org website. The other one is, especially in these times, more than ever, we have the Russian commemoration, the arrival of the Russian fleets in New York City and in San Francisco on September 24th, 1863, and October 12th, 1863. And I will promise to reveal the actual location next week. But you save the date. Save that entire evening of Tuesday, September 24th. Don't schedule any bowling leagues or sailing outings or anything of the sort. You want to be available in downtown Washington, D.C., September 24th. No, NATO will not participate. So you don't have any of them. You don't have the European Union. You don't have NATO. You've got a couple of renegade European powers. And you've got Ban Ki-moon. Ban Ki-moon, joined by Brahimi, his Syria negotiator. After meeting with Foreign Minister Lavrov of Russia, Brahimi came out and said, remember, only the UN Security Council can act. It's not my opinion. He says, I don't tell you what my opinion is. I'll simply tell you what international law is. Without the approval of the UN Security Council, it is illegal. And he reminded people that the goal here was supposed to be to get to Geneva 2. So Obama isolated. Obama is left with Hollande, but even Hollande begins to wobble. This shameful position, right? This repudiation of the heritage of General de Gaulle, this shameful operation of Atlanticist and Anglo-Saxon propitiation. Hollande claims on the one side he can prove that Assad did it, but he says he has to wait for the United Nations inspectors to complete that report of theirs. So Hollande is already putting up his own mechanisms of delay, and he says he will only decide after the U.S. Congress votes. So he's got two things that he can wait for. He's stalling. Well, good for him. It's about time he got some sense into his head. The Italian Prime Minister Letta, hanging tough and surprisingly so and commendable, hanging tough against an all-court press by the State Department gang against Susan Rice and Ben Rhodes. Letta has put out that tweet that people have seen, that the divisions in the world over Syria have. Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley reporting from Washington, D.C. The eyes of the world fixed for the last 2 days on the St. Petersburg G20 summit. And in the course of this, a split has come to light in the international community, but it's clear Obama is leading a forlorn cause, even on the level of verbal support, purely verbal support, which is far from active participation in aggression on the military level. Obama's verbal support is limited to France, to Turkey, to Canada, Saudi Arabia, and the British. And, of course, among these, Canada is unlikely, almost excluded, that Harper would ever join in the military action. The British government of Cameron has been cut off at the knees by its own parliament. And if Cameron insists on joining in the military attack, we will have a grade A constitutional crisis in Great Britain. Maybe we'll have the fall of the monarchy. If he uses the royal prerogative to go to war, maybe it's time to forget about the royal prerogative and abandon the cause of living in the past. The Saudis, of course, speaking out of all sides of their mouths, promising money and military forces, but of course their military forces are these mercenary forces, and then Turkey, and of course Erdogan, having been betrayed by Obama and those nighttime promises about the immediate collapse of Syria back in 2011. I think Erdogan is looking for revenge. And on the side of peace, we've got much of the world, Russia, China. This is very important that President Xi of China, wielding his veto in the UN Security